I'm here at the scene of the crime spree, right behind me.
Strange.
Vice Mayor Strange, you'll address her properly.
You can kiss my foot.
Mr. Rickard, you're out of order.
FBI, we are asking you to investigate this council. Please look into this council, how they award contracts, the bid process, how they use their positions to benefit their friends and themselves, how they use their positions to attack residents and critics and neighbors and business competition. FBI, will you please look into this?
And I welcome the FBI here. If you notice, Mr. Thompson, with his plea for the FBI and his watchdog group, this city runs the cleanest in this whole county. I guarantee
He was served a federal subpoena this morning.
Did receive a subpoena this morning, and we're going to cooperate 100% with the subpoena. And
Most of you who were involved up here, you gaslighted me. You tried to say I was crazy. And now we know that that's not true. And there's a lot of other issues I've been asking about as well.
Well, WMBB must feel stupid. They haven't even told you that the judge asked for this, that the judge told the defendants in the Lynn Haven corruption case, specifically developer James Finch and Mayor Margot Anderson, to submit after the evidentiary hearings last week a list of bad actors in the investigation and prosecution of this case that began with yeah, I can believe what I'm going to show you tonight. And I'm going to make it so that you can read the whole thing. All right. I'm going to link it so you can read the whole thing for yourself. It's 23. Wait, let's see. I thought it was more than that. 21 pages. Just filed today. I don't even know where to begin. It would be easier if you knew a little bit about this because WMBB was reporting it, but they didn't. So essentially what happened is 2.5 years ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Office and the FBI said there is so much corruption in the Panhandle and we are going to clean it up. So they began in Lynn Haven with Mayor Margot Anderson, and boy, there were 64 counts. It's unbelievable. Tremendous. Now they're down to 2, and they're down to 2 now because the court threw out most of the counts and because the prosecution themselves threw out 25 more recently. So she's down to 2 counts. It turns out, as we saw in the evidentiary hearing on Tuesday, that it wasn't her property, the ECS cleanup. The very charge that got her removed from office. What happens, Lynn Haven? What happens if it turns out your super popular mayor was removed on charges that were vindictive, on prosecution that was vindictive? What happens if none of it's true? So far, I don't know what the math is, but it's probably like 3.5% of the charges remain. 2 out of 64. I don't know, what is that? What percentage of the charges remain? And today, the judge got a list of, and you're going to see it, of bad actors. There are the lead prosecutor is named, and his bad acts are laid out according to the defense. Now, the judge may look at it and say, this is bunk. All right. Nobody did anything wrong except for you guys, for the mayor and the developer. He may say that. But considering he saw a boatload of evidence last week and specifically asked for it as he considers issuing sanctions against them, I'm guessing You can't guess, really. Because the more I learn about this stuff, the more I see that sometimes case law, past decisions that govern what the judge can do, he has discretion within those guide rails. Sometimes, it doesn't look like justice. It doesn't look like common sense. But he's looking at it. And he's also looking at, by the way, after he's called the investigators in the government unprofessional, haphazard, and reckless previously, he's also considering just throwing out the rest of them. He actually said for the first time, as he was looking this stuff over and preparing for trial, which is scheduled for February 28, it's surely going to be pushed back. He said, assuming there even is one. But WMBB, who today, by the way, you can look it up. They posted this morning on Facebook. Wow. They posted that they have award-winning coverage, that they broke the story of the Lynn Haven corruption, and they created a page on their website, and they pulled up all of their previous articles about it. So they're doubling down. They're doubling down, and their page, their articles look a hell of a lot like they are written by the prosecution team or the investigators. And part of what you'll see in here, the defendants claim that the U.S. attorney, the former U.S. attorney Larry Keefe, hired a big media firm, Sachs Media, and paid them close to $500,000 to encourage local news outlets to cover this stuff, whatever that means. And they claim it's illegal for them to do that. And when I ask who the hell is writing the stuff, the copy for WMBB, maybe it's them. Maybe it's Sachs Media. I don't know who it is, but I do know that when I watch Brady Calhoun, WMBB's reporter, sitting inside the federal proceedings, not taking notes, with very specific and sometimes complicated discussions taking place about the trial, the hearing, the case, and it gets over at 5:00, and we all walk out of the courtroom and the big giant courthouse in Tallahassee at 5:00, and all of a sudden a story is written real quick afterward. It's hard to believe that Brady Calhoun wrote it. If I were a betting man, I'd bet he's not. So I've got, why don't we get to it, right? You always take too long. That's what I've been told. All right, let's take a look at the just filed Defendant Finch's post-hearing supplement identifying specific relief sought. This is what Chief Federal Judge Mark Walker called the list of bad actors and bad acts. Oh, I said the lead prosecutor is in it, 2 investigators, and 3 officials from Lynn Haven are all identified as bad actors. Yep. Let's take a look at that right after this.
Have you received a speeding ticket for which you want no points placed onto your driving record? I'm El Saulene, 850-215-0628. Let me help you.
It might be freezing cold, but for some people, it's a hot time in Florida, and my friend Ryan can make sure your air conditioning is running at peak efficiency. He could even install a new one, built to a higher standard, American standard. Find out more at PCAirrepair.com. All right, let's get to it. This entire document you can find right now at watchdogsociety.org. That is the new website for the nonprofit, the Society for Watchdog Journalism. watchdogsociety.org. That's where this is, and that's where we are going right now. Are you ready for this? There it is. That's it right there. I'm not going to read the whole 21 pages, but I am going to read to you the most pertinent stuff. Okay. All right. So some of the preface here and stuff I'm not going to read, but I'm going to read the important stuff. You can read the whole thing. It's at watchdogsociety.org. All right. Based on the and this is from Finch's attorney, who they're working together in concert, Finch's attorneys and Anderson's attorneys. Based on the extraordinary history of this case, and it is extraordinary, including defendant Finch's motions and replies and the court orders, we respectfully maintain our permission that dismissal of the third superseding indictment, that is the fourth iteration of the indictment against Finch, and it's the fifth iteration of the original indictment against Margo Anderson. So since this has not been even hinted at by WMBB, this is so big of a story. And I know Facebook doesn't notify you because they don't like me. So if you've got friends you think need to see this, will you tag them? Will you share this? Will you be the notification? This is going to be incredible for you to see. All right. So as instructed by the court, it's not just something they filed willy-nilly. The following submission will identify bad acts, the bad actors, and the alternative sanctions other than just dismissing the whole thing. What's left of it is here. So the bad actors. The record evidence in this case demonstrates that the following individuals have exhibited a pattern of practice of misconduct throughout the case. Assistant United States Attorney Stephen Coons, who just submitted his retirement. Former FBI Special Agent Lawrence Borghini, who submitted his retirement last year. Bay County Sheriff's Office Major Jimmy Stanford, he's the head of Sheriff Ford's Public Trust Unit. Okay. So these footnotes, and you can read them for yourself, watchdogsociety.org. These footnotes are not something I'm going to read all of them because they give details to the judge as he considers possible sanctions against them. But I will show you this one. So the lead prosecutor, Stephen Coons, who just submitted his retirement, and is the first one named here, he accused, you might remember, it's very famous, he accused a couple of murdering their toddler. It was on Nancy Grace and all that back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It was about that time. Turns out that this same prosecutor was the one who lied and planted evidence in that case. And the Justice Department had to pay out like $2 million over that. And he was admonished. He was punished by the Florida bar and all that stuff. So they bring that up. And it says they admonished him, the lead prosecutor back then, as grossly irresponsible and comparing his use of the grand jury to giving a small boy a loaded pistol without instruction as to when and how it could be used. All right. Talks about these guys' retirement. It says Sheriff Tommy Ford, Assistant U.S. Attorney Coons, and FBI Agent Borghini knew from the beginning that Stanford had a close personal and financial relationship with Derwin White, an apparent target of the investigation. Coons, the lead prosecutor, told the grand jury, "Our ultimate goal is Derwin White and James Finch." Okay. So we've got, who was the three there? Coons, Borghini, Stanford. Who are the next ones? Lynn Haven Police Chief Ricky Ramey's been named as a bad actor by the defendants. Former Lynn Haven City Manager Michael White and current Lynn Haven City Manager Vicky Gaynor. This was a rough day for Vicky Gaynor, and you'll see why. So what are the bad acts? multiple flawed indictments. In the last 2 years, the government has returned multiple legally invalid indictments, knowing that's why there are so many iterations of it, the third and fourth superseding indictments, knowing that they violate court orders and various rules of law. The government has disregarded court orders regarding errors to be corrected and strict adherence to the due process and fairness. So back to the close relationship between the sheriff's lead, the guy heading up the public trust unit at the sheriff's office, says despite this knowledge that Sheriff Ford had, Major Stanford participated in at least 38 interviews between April 4th, 2019 and November 12th, 2021. Stanford's participation in the investigation suddenly stopped only after the court ordered the government to produce their investigation notes, revealing the extent of Stanford's corruption to the defense team. Don't get mad at me. I'm just reading the court filings that the judge asked for based on evidence. It goes on. It was common knowledge, said Michael White, and this is a testimony of Michael White to the FBI that Stanford is corrupt, and other people that surely the sheriff's office will say is just hearsay. It goes on. Finch's list of bad acts is by no means exhaustive, but it does give a fair account. So compare what they told the first grand jury to what they told the fourth time they went back to another grand jury to get a rewrite of the indictment. At first, they said alleging that Barnes had performed actions for the benefit of Finch, including, and they listed them. Later on, they alleged that Anderson performed actions for the benefit of Finch, including voting and pressuring and advising city officials to take action favorable to Finch on certain projects. All right, so then it talks about problems in the indictments. I'm going to skim through some of this stuff. You can read it all, watchdog.org, watchdogsociety.org. And it goes to what these are the reasons why the court threw out so many charges. All right, so let's go to grand jury misconduct. At this juncture, the court is intimately familiar with defendants' motions, arguments, and evidence presented. Accordingly, we will not go into detail about every instance that FBI agent Borghini and prosecutor Coons provided misleading and false information to multiple grand juries. And it talks about the FBI agent's testimony regarding a promissory note related to the 17th Street project, which was false. It talked about the FBI agent's false testimony regarding the post-hurricane Michael City rebuild projects, false. It says that the prosecutor Coons orchestrated the presentations when they were in front of the grand jury. So the only person who testified in front of the grand jury about all the probable cause, about all the corruption of Mayor Margot Anderson was the FBI agent Borghini. And it was done in a question answer format. And it says the prosecutor's questions in front of the grand jury were extraordinarily leading and suggestive. They would never have been allowed before a trial jury. And worse, the prosecutor and agent took the worst possible spin on the facts. And there are a lot of examples of that. For example, one of the biggest ones is that James Finch was recovering the whole month of October when the hurricane hit. From October 4, he had a brain bleed. And he was in a coma for a while, and he was recovering for the entire month. He didn't get back until the very end of October. And what they told the grand jury was that he was, quote, out of pocket. That's what they told him. That's what they told the grand jury. He was out of pocket. They didn't say what I just told you. And there are many examples of that. Another example of that is when Mayor Margot Anderson brought to Sheriff Ford on April 1st, 2019, She had a printout because she had discovered that ECS, which was owned by Mickey White, the late Derwin White's nephew, that they had fraudulently billed the city like $5 million. So she had a printout, and at the bottom of the printout, it said like there were $5 million. And Sheriff Ford saw that and said, go back and get me the invoices and the receipts. But the way that Coons and Borghini described this to the grand jury to get the first indictment was that Mayor Anderson was the one that did that, and that she was trying to get out of trouble, and that she brought, quote, a piece of paper with some numbers on it to the sheriff. You see? That's what this is about. So the August 2020 original indictment included specific allegation that defendant Anderson signed a promissory note for 30 years of payments to defendant Finch's company. This is crazy the way this goes on. But I'm going to let you read these specifics at watchdogsociety.org. Goes on. Borghini and Coons routine misstatements of fact regarding the transfer of the motorhome between Finch and Lee Anderson, her husband. At first, they said that Finch had given it to Anderson, to the mayor. That was the first thing. And then it's changed several times since then. They still have the motorhome, though. The feds, not the Andersons. Presenting and soliciting testimony about false and misleading statements, grand jury exhibits prepared by the FBI agent regarding Commissioner Barnes' votes and Anderson's travel and expenses. Prosecutor Coons asked the same prejudicial question multiple times about Finch that was based on a factual premise not supported by evidence. I've seen a bunch of that inside the federal proceedings. At the conclusion of the government's presentation on November 16, 2021 to another grand jury, the government presented the grand jury with the second superseding indictment. Okay, a 26 count indictment. So I think that's when it went from 64 counts down to 26, covering 6.5 years, alleging multiple complex transactions involving dozens of people. Approximately 60 exhibits were shown to the grand jurors, permitting the grand jury to deliberate 90 seconds, 120 seconds before asking the grand jury to vote and return the government's flawed charging document. If this stuff is true, if the judge finds that this stuff is true, what happens if the mayor of Lynn Haven was removed and it was a setup? Who knew about it and who should have known about it? So it goes on. Specifically, the prosecutor's questions to the grand jury and the agent's testimony suggested that Margot Anderson was part of the financial agreement and title transfer for the motorhome, and that her name appeared on the title documents. So they told the grand jurors. The questions and testimony were false and misleading and served as the basis of multiple counts. I'm gonna let you read these details, okay? Because I want to get through this and tell you the rest of the names and what they're asking for. You can read all of this at watchdogsociety.org. All right. So, all right. The government's other reckless, careless, and unprofessional conduct. Outside the grand jury, the government has committed additional bad acts that warrant a finding of recklessness and vindictiveness, which in turn warrants sanctions. First, when it was apparent that Assistant U.S. Attorney Coons was seeking the return of an indictment against the 71-year-old Finch, Finch's lawyers attempted to discuss voluntary surrender and conditions of release. During an in-person meeting on January 12th, Coons, 2021, Coons represented to the counts to them that the FBI determined surrender. So the U.S. Attorney's Office told Finch's lawyers, the FBI decides whether or not Finch can turn himself in or there's going to be a big arrest, made. if they're going to cuff him and stuff him. He said that's for the FBI to decide. Now, following the return of the superseding indictment, the FBI agent Borghini called James Finch directly, despite Finch being represented by counsel. Not supposed to do that. Finch was in the attorney's office in Tallahassee for Margo Anderson. He was there, ready to turn himself in. He'd been there for several days. Bypassing counsel, speaking directly to Finch, the FBI agent expressed extreme anger that the government didn't have the opportunity to publicly arrest Finch. Finch was in the presence of attorney Vizina, who overheard the FBI agent's over-the-phone reaction. Let's take a look at this footnote here. Oh, so the government cannot seriously dispute that the statement is blatantly false. Clearly, the U.S. Attorney's Office has the authority to direct the voluntary surrender and recommend bond conditions for an indicted individual, despite Coons's representation that voluntary surrender was somehow a decision made only by the FBI. In truth, it is routine and customary across the nation to allow a nonviolent individual to surrender, especially ones who have been voluntarily interviewed by the FBI without counsel, as he was, I guess, initially, provided voluminous records pursuant to the grand jury subpoena, and maintained regular contact with the prosecutors through counsel. So the FBI was upset that he wasn't home when they wanted to arrest him. Instead, he was in Tallahassee, ready to turn himself in. The failure to arrest Finch at his home in front of his family and media did not diminish the government's desire to recklessly publicize the case, risking to taint a potential jury pool and causing extreme damage to Finch's company. Instead, evidence demonstrates that the government illegally employed a third-party media group to orchestrate the announcement of the indictment, the superseding indictment, and the arrests. The outside media company was further tasked with drafting tweets about the case and with drafting former United States attorney Larry Keefe's op-ed. So Larry Keefe wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Tallahassee Democrat. And it was titled, it'll get to the title. So I guess they spent $429,000 to contract Sachs Media and the United States Attorney's Office, according to the invoices. The government admitted that it planned to and desired to publicly arrest Finch. There it is. In the footnote 14, the government has repeatedly made statements in press conferences violating both the letter and spirit of the Justice Manual. Compare Larry Keefe. This was an op-ed piece written by the U.S. Attorney. It was drafted by the media group. And it was titled, U.S. Attorney's Public Trust Unit is Protecting Our Way of Life. And in it, I looked up the article. It said that his public trust unit had succeeded in prosecuting Lynn Haven Mayor Margo Anderson without indicating that the charges were pending. This was a year and a half ago, and she's presumed innocent with justice. So that is against the Justice Manual's policies. So they were hired to do things like detailed time reports during the August 2022 referencing in the Panama City media list, where they were pushing for media coverage of the press conference, and I attended those. I was part of that. These actions were taken in spite of federal law making it clear that appropriated funds may not be used to pay a publicity expert unless specifically appropriated for that purpose. Yet another example of reckless, improper behavior. The government has repeatedly attempted to manufacture a conflict of interest. So this goes into developer James Finch early on loaning or paying the legal fees for Margo Anderson, which I guess are in the millions. So they made a big deal about that. It turned out the judge said it wasn't a big deal as long as they abided by certain conduct. All right. So let's keep going. In short, the government's reckless carelessness and illegal media campaign is evidence in the sovereign that the sovereign disregarded its legal and ethical obligations. Winning was the goal, says the defense, all at the expense of justice. All right, so Sixth Amendment violations. The FBI agent and the U.S. attorney employed former Assistant State Attorney Greg Wilson as a government informant to invade the defense camp. Contrary to Borghini, I was there at the march, and this was covered in the press, and we've talked about it at the evidentiary hearing back in March. And Greg Wilson said that FBI agent Borghini was using him as an informant. But FBI agent Borghini and Coons said that wasn't true. Who are you going to believe, us or Greg Wilson? Well, after that testimony, Greg Wilson supplied text messages that proved that indeed, he was asked to do things by the FBI agent. Watch, follow along. Contrary to Borghini's sworn testimony and the government's representations, the court had little trouble, this is what the judge said, little trouble concluding that Wilson acted as a government agent. So, wow. July 2020, Borghini and Coons met with Wilson, and Wilson signed an immunity agreement, according to this filing, stating that he would provide information about public corruption. But to date, the government has not provided the defense with a copy of that. All right. So, and that's another important example. They say that the government continues to hide evidence. Clearly, the purpose was to initiate contact with Finch and other represented parties to discuss case-related issues in violation of the Sixth Amendment, attorney-client privilege. So, Greg Wilson, and I watched this, said I was asked to find out the contents of a box in late Derwin White's office labeled attorney-client privilege, and then later the location of the box. And the defense attorney said, did you know at the time that Derwin was represented by an attorney? Wilson said, I did. And Wilson said, I know there were occasions that I was directed by the FBI agent to specifically find out certain information that I did not know. And did that include a meeting with a represented party and questioning them? And Wilson says, yes, at least one time. Even more egregious, says the court filing today, is the fact that the FBI agent testified. I watched this. This was, you talk about shocking. Because Greg Wilson said that he was asked to find this stuff out by the FBI agent. And then the FBI agent took the stand and said, absolutely not. So talk about a dramatic moment. And I just figured they're going to have to believe the FBI agent. He's an officer of the court, I guess, I think, right? And certainly the U.S. attorney is. Coons. Well, after he said that, after he made those sworn statements in front of Judge Walker, Greg Wilson produced text messages indicating that that wasn't true. That's what this is about. Even more egregious is the fact that Borghini testified under oath, questioning under questioning by Coons, that he never instructed Wilson to do anything with respect to obtaining any information or evidence whatsoever. And this is Coons now asking the questioning to Borghini. And after each of these times you'd met with Wilson, you never told him, listen, go out and get more information and call me back, did you? No. Did you tell Mr. Wilson to go out and get more information, or did you give any instructions about working or giving you information? The FBI agent, no, I did not. And then Borghini offered, the FBI agent, and I saw this. This was a strong statement. I've never directed Greg Wilson to do anything. So then he's asked by Coons, after May 10th of 2021, did you hear from Mr. Wilson again before August 26, 2021? And the FBI agent said no. Prior to this date of August 26, were you aware of any box marked attorney-client privilege being inside of JC's building there? And Borghini said no. And Coons goes on, and you never told Mr. Wilson to do anything with respect to obtaining any evidence whatsoever. Is that correct? That is correct. So the defense says, like his testimony before multiple grand juries, Borghini's sworn testimony to this court is demonstrably false. Then it goes into, these are still the bad actions, repeat violations of the court's discovery orders. So the defense is entitled to evidence that could show that they didn't do it. Well, the prosecutors and the investigators have been hiding it, not turning it over despite the judge and despite the law, over and over and over again to this day. To this day. And the defense says the record is replete with the government's multiple discovery violations, including but not limited to late productions, improper redactions, and withholding Brady material, exculpatory material, until the defense discovered the government's misconduct. In other words, they never would have got it unless the defense came across it, heard about it, it was leaked in the press, something. After the violations were brought to light, the government regularly blamed others, including the defense, and denied responsibility. For example, prosecutors' excuses ranged from claiming that all Brady material had been provided as of March of last year. To the defense, another excuse was the defense had not requested Brady material and not been specific enough with their requests. You can see all this stuff if you think I'm skimming over it too fast at watchdogsociety.org. It's just posted there. And also the government said the Brady material was not in their possession. We don't have it. Okay. You keep asking for stuff that shows you're not guilty, and we don't have it. They also said that the Brady material was sitting in the sheriff's office, right? And it's not in our files, it's in their files. Now they're working together. In fact, the FBI agent testified that he maintained notes and other information that could be relevant to the case, to this case, outside of the FBI file. Clearly, Borghini maintained his files, notes, and reports in the most haphazard, reckless way possible, says the defense. The bad acts are not isolated to the federal agents, though. Several local and municipal officers participated in the misconduct. I'm going to let you read through those specifics. All right. So these are the things that the other named bad actors, according to the defense, allegedly did. Bay County Sheriff's Office Major Jimmy Stanford destroyed all of his written notes, despite the government's representation that it instructed all officers and agents to preserve their rough notes. Why would you destroy your notes when you're not supposed to do that? Lynn Haven Police Chief Ricky Ramey set on critical evidence that was gathered at Margo Anderson's instruction for several days before turning it over to Stanford. This is fascinating. Do you remember I told you on April 1st, Margo Anderson went to Sheriff Ford with that paper with some numbers on it. And she said, oh my God, Sheriff, I've discovered $5 million of fraud by ECS, Mickey White, the nephew of late Derwin White. Sheriff Ford said, holy smokes, just like that. And he said, I'll tell you what I need you to do is don't tell anybody. and go see city manager Vicky, or acting city manager Vicky Gay. Go get the receipts. Go get all the evidence. And so she did. She went there, and it was current city manager, then acting city manager Vicky Gaynor's responsibility to dig it up, and she did. So now Mayor Anderson has all the evidence that the sheriff wants. She turns around. I'm taking some storytelling license here, okay? Because it's Friday night, man, and I'm exhausted. But I had to tell you about this, right? But the point is, Chief Ramey was there. He appeared somehow and said, "Hey, I'll help you." And so Mayor Anderson said, "Oh, thank God," because she trusted Chief Ramey. And Chief Ramey's an officer of the law, interested in justice. And so he took that for her. But evidently, from what I've been seeing, he didn't take it to the sheriff. He gave it to Jimmy Stanford. And they had it for days, I guess. So have you ever heard of this chain of custody stuff when it comes to voting? So between Margot Anderson getting the evidence that showed ECS had committed the fraud, she gave it to Ricky Ramey and gave it to Stanford. And by the time I guess it got to the sheriff, it implicated Mayor Anderson too. So the whistleblower blew the whistle on herself, I guess. It's an interesting story, right? Also, Chief Ramey's close relationship with former Lynn Haven city manager Michael White. We've been hearing about that lately. You know, Michael White has a bro who's, squeeze on the side is ticked him off. And so Ricky Ramey says, "We'll arrest her ass." And Michael White said, "Good, set her up if you have to." And they did. And they did. See, most people hear a story like that and they, sort of glide over it or gloss over it, but I don't. I see a woman who did not deserve to have Lynn Haven police officers arrest her and humiliate her with details I'm not going to tell you about right now. Because when I tell the story the way I tell the story, I'm not disparaging her. And I just don't want to tell you how these officers humiliated her. I may have to. I may, whatever. So yeah, they were really close. However, by the way, even despite the false arrest, the Lynn Haven mayor, who has a doctor in leadership, he says, and every other commissioner other than Judy Tinder, they don't think that warrants an emergency meeting just to talk about it. Okay. It blows my mind. The excuses, the corruption, I don't even have the words. I've been going at this so hard over the past couple weeks, chasing this stuff down, trying to gather it up, read it, understand it, present it to you, and then I watch my colleagues in the media cover it up. If that's not news, what is? And when they do talk about it, they outright lie to you, especially WMBB. They outright lie to you. And they lie by omission, too. Since the evidentiary hearings last week, they've never told you that there's a bad actors list. Never mentioned it to you. But here it is. And I'm gonna finish this with you and remind you where you can see it all right after this.
You want to look good? You want to feel good? Little John's Big and Tall is where it's at. Right across the street from Sky's Pizza Pie, 5700 North Davis Highway. You can find out more online at littlejohnsbigandtall.com. He's also a member of the iTex trading community, where your iTex dollars are welcome. Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777.
All right, so they're talking about Chief Ramey's close relationship with Lynn Haven City Manager, who was his boss, by the way. His real boss, the chief at the time, was Matt Reimer, who just recently last week retired, or earlier this week, I guess, something like that, retired from the state attorney's office. He was previously the chief of police. This all happened under his watch. And it talks about 31,000 pages of Michael White's phone records demonstrating shocking misconduct and bias. Until very recently, virtually no one, witness, officer, agent, or anyone has been questioned about the rampant case-related misconduct and general corruption in the Bay County Sheriff's Office and Lynn Haven Police Department. To the extent limited inquiry is being made, the disparity and contradiction is overwhelming and clearly designed to cover up rather than reveal bad conduct. I hate that I have to read that to you, but it will be, it's being looked at now by the federal court and Judge Walker. Look at this. Number 27, following Chief Ramey's testimony last week, defendant Finch's wife was arrested by Lynn Haven Police Department on Friday afternoon and held overnight before being released the next day on a recognizance bond. So Gary Shale, Lieutenant Gary Shale, is the one who arrested her. And the court will recall that it was the same guy who arrested the woman that Michael White wanted arrested for making his bro mad. The same guy. He's been with Ricky Ramey for a long time. They both came from the sheriff's office. And it talks about Ramey's officer apparently claims that Finch's wife was in joint possession of an empty vial containing trace amounts of white powder residue, which did come back as cocaine from the lab. The empty vial was allegedly seized 4 months earlier from Finch's wife's ex-husband's home. Finch's wife has been divorced from her previous husband for more than 12 years. Okay. Bay County Sheriff's Officer Tommy Ford aggressively questioned Commissioner Judy Tinder about the easement of her property, on her property, when Commissioner Tinder did not agree with the sheriff's insinuations that would support the government's bogus theory against Margo Anderson. He got visibly angry and terminated the interview. That was what Judy Tinder said when she was on the witness stand last week. And that's especially disturbing because the evidence was shown in court last week, and the judge himself said that that's not her property. So that's off the table. That was a lie. Why would that upset Sheriff Ford? If it's not her property, it's not her property. It didn't take long for the court to see it. At the December 12th, the hearing last week. Oh, here we go. This is why City Manager Vicki Gaynor had a really bad day. I'm telling you, today she had to produce, after she was on the witness stand last week, she pulled out a notepad. And there's a question about whether it's authentic. Did she recently write in this notepad, or is this the actual notepad that she wrote in 3 or 4 years ago, detailing problems that she saw, crimes that she saw with Finch and Margo Anderson? So was that what was that, steno pad real evidence, or did she write in it? There was a question about that. So guess what the court did? They said, okay, well, by Friday, today, City Manager Vicki Gaynor had to turn in the binder that she pulled up from her down here. She pulled it up. And look what it says. She began using notes she described as being taken in her official capacity as an employee of Lynn Haven. And she testified that she provided what was in that binder, those notes, to the federal government, to the prosecutors. The government conceded that Borghini used some notes from Gaynor as the basis for his testimony to the grand jury. So did they match? Because Vicky Gaynor told the court, I gave this stuff to the prosecutors a while back. So they got all, it's the same thing. She submitted that today. Or it was due today, but it's been submitted for review. Okay, and then it talks about, and I don't want to go into this because we've been talking about this, and there was just a hearing the other day, Wednesday. Coons' actions leading to Antonius Barnes executing a false statement. I don't remember if it was yesterday or Wednesday, but I was there. The days are running into each other now. All right, so we saw that. That's the coercion and what Barnes later described more as feeling overwhelmed about the stuff. But still, he says Finch didn't bribe him and he keeps his plea. And that's what he's always said. If it was different, I'd tell you. What do you think? I'm WMBB? I'm going to tell you something that I know is wrong today and is going to be proven wrong next week. That doesn't slow them down at all. How's that possible? I could understand. I could understand if WMBB told you something today and they had a way of changing it, fixing it so that it appears they never lied to you. I get it. People do that kind of stuff. But how can they lie to you last week when they know for sure that they're going to be outed this week? Why? How can they keep doing that? All right, so let's get to it here. Let's keep going. All right, so we know about the Barnes stuff. Let's get past that. All right, so here is what the defense is asking for. Okay, they really want the whole thing thrown out, but the judge said, look, it's almost impossible to do that before a trial. So I have to exhaust all lesser sanctions against, if warranted, if the judge finds it's warranted, against maybe some of the bad actors that we've been talking about. Maybe he'll see this and find none of that, but he's got to go through all of that before he is permitted by law to exercise his discretion to dismiss the remaining indictment before trial. So this is what the defense is asking for. In lieu of straight up dismissal, Finch respectfully requests that the court fashion severe and meaningful sanctions for the government's history of violating court orders, discovery abuse, due process violations, and grand jury misconduct, including but not limited to the following or a combination thereof. The dismissal of count one, the dismissal of the remaining counts on Finch. Exclusion of evidence and testimony by the government's case in chief, and that would be former FBI agent Lawrence Borghini, his testimony to the grand jury, Michael White's testimony, Lynn Haven Police Chief Ricky Ramey's testimony, and Lynn Haven City Manager Vicky Gaynor's testimony. So also exclusion of Antonius Barnes' statement of facts. This is what I was referring to yesterday. So after Barnes's plea deal, where he pled guilty on an unrelated charge, later on, the government wrote up something that insinuated that there was some intent to influence. Okay. And they made him sign it. That's what they're talking about there. And that's because yesterday there was a proceeding that addressed all this stuff. Multiple instructions from the court explaining in part that the court's finding of recklessness unprofessional. So the judge has already rebuked the prosecutors and investigators. For example, the jury should be made aware, the jury, if it goes to trial, should be made aware that we are on the third superseding indictment, the fourth rewrite or the fourth write-up, in part due to the government's reckless investigation and false and misleading information. That's what, if it goes to trial, they believe the jury should be told that. In order requiring the government take all necessary steps to preview and process all material seized from GAC, they still don't have all the material that they seized from GAC contractors a year and a half ago. They say they haven't gotten through it all. And anyway, that's, you can read it for yourself, watchdogsociety.org. So here is the conclusion. Oh, by the way, it mentions in one of the footnotes, I'm not going to look for it. It mentions in one of the footnotes that the binder or the little notepad that Vicky Gaynor referred to as a witness last week in front of the court, that notepad on cursory review, according to this, does not match what the government produced, what the prosecutors had. There are some things in there. I better read it. Let me read it so I get it just right. Tell me when you see Vicky. All right, let me see if I can find this. I think the way, I'm not going to look for it. I think the way it was worded was on cursory review. They just got it and looked at it. There were some differences, is I think the way they said that. All right, so let's get to the conclusion. Sorry. All right. Here we go. Individually and isolated, one might review the misconduct in this case as constitutionally correctable. Cumulatively, in context, a much different conclusion is warranted. The bad actor's wrongdoing is extreme. The bad acts are virtually unprecedented. They individually and collectively violate the very core of our Constitution and are shocking in breadth and scope. It is beyond dispute that prosecutorial misconduct may become, quote, so outrageous that due process principles would absolutely bar the government from invoking judicial processes to obtain a conviction. That's from a case law. And it says such is the case here when previous things have happened and they've been dismissed. So they're backing up their argument. One of the key factors, according to this, is in determining whether prosecutorial misconduct rises to the level of a due process violation is whether the case involved the government's passive tolerance of it or whether it was a conscious direction of misconduct by government agents. Viewed in its totality, the multiple and repeat instances, are of misconduct identified herein and throughout these proceedings are undoubtedly the result of conscious direction by government, its agents, officers, informants, and witnesses. Deliberate and conscious decisions were made to violate rule after rule after rule in a single-minded pursuit of convictions, all in the most public way possible for the benefit of former United States Attorney's newly announced public trust unit, which was headed by Assistant U.S. Attorney Coons. In the process of this public crusade, the Constitution was put aside. The defendant's due process rights were repeatedly violated by the government. Most respectfully, there is but one entity able to rectify this constitutional wrong: this United States court. In other words, Chief Judge Mark Walker, who's been very deliberate in his consideration of all of this. All right. I will tell you also that Mayor Anderson also filed her relief. And, I only chose one of these to go over, but this also applies to her because it's a joint sort of a situation here. And the attorneys are all working together. The defendants are working together on the remnants, on the remaining bit of the fifth indictment against her and the fourth indictment against him. So she did file as well. We should make guesses on. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to look at your comments right now. So the headline is clearly, let me look at your comments. The headline is clearly defense submits list of bad actors and bad acts for judge to consider appropriate sanctions. That's undoubtedly the headline. After that, if it's a real news article, it would talk about Judge Walker asked the defense for this because there was so much evidence presented last week that clearly there's something wrong, and he's already rebuked the investigators and prosecutors. So the evidence forced him to request this before he can actually dismiss the remaining part of this whole case. That's what this is about. Whether you like it, whether you agree with it, whatever, that's what it's about. But here's what I want to do. I want to look at your comments. Let's take a guess of what WMBB's headline is going to be. How are they going to spin this? And why do they have this, I don't know, conspiracy with whoever they're working with to persecute Mayor Anderson and to mislead you, which is kind of like a conspiracy to commit honest services fraud, if you ask me, right? Let's see what you all are saying. Let's see who gets closest to what they're going to say. How's WMBB going to spin this? They didn't even tell their audience about this, that it was coming today. Instead, they've been reading from some fakakta letter by some fakakta. Oh, by the way, I found out a lot about that. Who Vicky Gaynor hired, who the city hired to write that letter. Oh my gosh. They didn't hire, and it wasn't done in good faith. They didn't hire an attorney to provide guidance, recommendations to the city. They hired an attorney who specializes in getting governments out of trouble from lawsuits. Lynn Haven lied to you guys. And WMBB is talking about that instead of this tremendous big story. All right, let's see here. Lady Justice hasn't been blind in this case, but hopefully checks and balances within the rule of law will correct miscarriage of justice. Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. They have a relationship. Yeah. Oh, that's right. I should mention they've been lifelong friends. And look, I've told Margot Anderson this. I've said, because I've known, we weren't really friends, but we're friendly. We liked each other over the years. And when this went down, I thought, gosh, 64 counts. I mean, she must have done some of them. I hate it. I told her that. But as I continued to look closer and closer and closer, I didn't see any evidence of any of this. And as a matter of fact, I saw a hell of a lot of evidence that she was set up. And that's what they're talking about here. But it's my opinion that if you have, and she was a great mayor, she had like a 90% approval rating when they yanked her out of there. It still has the appearance of impropriety. It's you can be best friends, or you can be the mayor, or there's going to be some appearance of impropriety, no matter how hard you try. And by the way, she did. During these votes, none of them, all of them were 5-0 votes, by the way, recommended by staff. So none of these were like hers was the deciding vote or Barnes was the deciding vote, which is the standard, really. They were all 5-0 votes. And she even asked attorneys in the meetings, am I supposed to vote on this? and she went by the advice of the council. This whole thing is outrageous. But I think it's important to know that they've been lifelong friends, or almost. All right, let's see here. Here's a prediction: big corruption. That's why it happened. Absolutely. Let's see. Headline from WMBB: The defense files motions to try to get their corrupt clients out of hot water. That's a good one. That's a good one. You might have saved them from doing some work, Jody. They'll just take that one and head over to Firefly or something like that. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to look at all of your comments a little bit later, but big news just came out, and I had to share it with you. I want to, of course, thank the Unknown Patriot for your support, and you can read that whole thing. It's posted at the Society for Watchdog Journalism. You can go there at watchdogsociety.org and read the whole thing for yourself, and draw your own conclusions. But it's important to know, I think some people are still evaluating this in their head based on what they saw on TV in that first indictment, where they got what I'm thinking, just about everything wrong. You talk about, do you think it damaged the character and reputation of James Finch and Margot Anderson? Was it actual malice? I can't even believe this story. I hate that I have to tell you all about this. What I really wish is that the Sheriff's Public Trust Unit and the FBI would have spent all of this treasure and all of this time and used all of their talents to go after the people that they know committed crimes, the real criminals, the ones that they told another judge in a search warrant affidavit of the GAC material. They said Bay County is more corrupt than New Jersey and more corrupt than New Orleans. They name names. I know for sure that they've got the goods on a lot of folks here who extended the hurricane cleanup, inflated the prices, lined their own pockets. You talk about conspiracy to fraud the people. You talk about racketeering. They know about it. But the real truth and the rest of the story might be too awful to even consider. Have a nice weekend. Look, and if I may not, I guess I'll talk to you again before Christmas. I'll see you soon.